that said, we'll kick things off. This morning, they had a press screening here in Cleveland for Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves, and Mr. Flickinger over here was able to get us into the press screening, so you will hear our original thoughts on it besides what was talked about in the car. All spoiler-free. We're not going to dive into the specifics, but our impressions of the film. So we'll kick things off. I was excited about the movie because it's from the guys that wrote and directed Game Night from a few years back, which was just like a real fun and funny film about games. And the people that made the movie about Game Night are doing Dungeons and Dragons. And I thought this might actually turn out to be pretty fun. What was your expectation going into the film?
I just wanted to see Dungeons and Dragons, and we got both of those things. I was pleased. I'm not a hardcore D&D fan, but I think even the casual viewer could go into this and enjoy it. And if anything, I think they got the tone right. If they tried to take this serious like Lord of the Rings, I think it would have failed because this movie would have cost $9 billion to make. But the fact that it's a slapstick comedy that you can also take serious at the same time, I was pleased by it. I think it was the biggest surprise thus far of the year.
It's very self-aware. I think it does what Game Night did well. It does what you're kind of missing out of the more recent blockbusters. I think this year, other than one in particular that we'll talk about, has been kind of disappointing in the blockbuster superhero world space. But this movie, and even as someone who doesn't know anything, doesn't know anything about Dungeons and Dragons, I feel like I want to go check out the lore now just from what I saw in this film.
Yeah, absolutely.
My sister runs a weekly D&D game. Did you want to join in with her?
I think
my sister's hardcore into gaming and D&D, and she's tried to suck me in. And they're like, we're doing like a 2-year-long campaign. I was like, all right, that's too long of a commitment, sister. I can do like 5 hours. I can give you a night. But so my sister really wanted to know my thoughts on it. You're going to hear my thoughts on it before my sister hears my thoughts. It's a fun adventure. It's as someone that's played this much D&D with my sister, there's all these little references for people that if you play the game, the way that it plays out plays kind of like a D&D game, but it's also just very accessible to anybody. It's, as they've referenced, it's a comedy, and everyone's really charming and funny in it. It has plenty of action set pieces, plenty of spectacle, all the stuff that you kind of want. And yeah, it was, from the first trailers, it was like, is this going to be any good? It's much better than I think it looked from the first trailer.
I think the one thing we both agreed on after the movie was in D&D, you sort of just make it up as you go with imagination. And there's some of these big set pieces, that action sequences that are going on. It just feels like they're making it up as they go. Like, oh, I need this slingshot to get out of this situation. And then they find it over here. So I thought that was like true to the game. I appreciated that.
It like little moments where it pauses to like talk about all the little items that they have to see what they can do with the things. Just like in a D&D game. It was like, all right, that feels like you're playing a little D&D. I would say that has some negative consequences, however, when it comes to backstory, where it pauses every time in the first half of the movie it introduces a character or an item. It pauses and goes, well, let me tell you the story about how we got here. Let me tell you where this item came from. There was a battle, and it always does that, which that's what the game D&D is like. But when you're watching a movie and every time this plot's about to kick in, it pauses to tell you where everything came from, slows things down in the first half. So I felt the second half, it came together a lot better, and you could just feel the momentum. You cared about the characters, you cared about the emotional arcs and everything.
But just as a counter, though, I think they have the cast to pull that off. I think this solidified for me that Chris Pine, he may be the best Chris, because I think of Star Trek. Seriously,
maybe that's a new topic. Who is the best Chris?
Well, he may, because
who is the best Chris?
I think of Hell or High Water. Yeah. I think of Oscar-worthy roles, and then I think of Star Trek. He carried an entire franchise, and then I look at this movie and I'm like, I don't know if I would have been as compelled without Chris Pine in the lead role, because he genuinely was so entertaining.
He's very Captain Kirk in this movie as well.
Absolutely.
Leading the way with this
absolutely.
Absolutely. I was just happy to see Michelle Rodriguez in another movie that wasn't Fast and Furious. It's
all about family, John.
She's playing the same tough, I was going to say tough guy, tough gal, just that beats everybody. She's kind of playing the same role, but this time she has an axe and chops heads off, which
is cool.
I always love to see heads cut off.
Yeah, me too.
Violence. Yeah.
What would be your biggest criticism of the film?
I would say so it's very self-aware on the cliches, but even then, it still does the cliches. It does the typical hero's journey. It hits on the tropes, but it still does the tropes. And there were moments where I was rolling my eyes, but 5 minutes later, I'm like, oh, they're actually really self-aware right here. So there were times where I was kind of like sighing, oh, okay, but way less than some of the more recent Thor: Love and Thunder.
What was the James Franco fantasy comedy called? Your Highness, I believe.
That wasn't a couple years ago. That was like over 10 years ago. We're getting old.
I don't know where I'm at right now.
Good pull.
So when you do fantasy and comedy, it can go wrong like that, but this pulled it off.
Yeah, I agree.
I'd watch it again. I kind of want to watch it again like tomorrow or something. Like,
okay.
It gave me what I needed.
Awesome, man.
Yeah.
Oh,
and I took an edible.
So to that point,